All right. Well, as sports fans, we all tend to take for granted the whole free agency system that we have right now. And as hard as it is to believe, especially after the baseball offseason, where baseball clubs spent a record $2.5 billion on player contracts, there actually was a time where there was no free agency in baseball. All players were bound to the teams that drafted them by what was known as the reserve clause, which basically gave teams the right to keep their players as long as they wanted. And this all changed in the late 60s and the early 70s, and it culminated on February 3rd, 1976. The Kansas City Royals lost an appeal before District Court Judge John W. Oliver in the case of the Royals versus the Major League Baseball Players Association, which upheld what was known as the Sites ruling, which ruled that two baseball players were allowed to become free agents, overruling their respective clubs' right to simply renew their contracts. The way this came about, this was a long, drawn-out process that started with the efforts of Curt Flood. Curt Flood was a player in the late 1960s, and in 1969, he was traded from the St. Louis Cardinals to the Washington Senators. Flood refused to report to the Phillies, and he wrote a letter to Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn under the advisement of the Players Association head Marvin Miller, who was one of the first heads of the Major League Baseball Players Association. He was a forefather in what would become the free agency movement. And in this letter, Flood demanded that the commissioner declared him a free agent. And I'll read a little bit of the letter he wrote right here. Quote, "After 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel I am a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes. I believe that any system which produces the result violates my basic rights as a citizen and is inconsistent with the laws of the United States and of these several states. It is my desire to play baseball in 1970, and I am capable of playing. I received a contract offer from the Philadelphia club, but I believe I have the right to consider offers from other clubs before making any decision. I therefore request that you make known to all major league clubs my feelings in this matter and advise them of my availability for the 1970 season." Now, Kuhn denied this for Flood, and as a result, Flood sat out the entire 1970 season. His case was brought before the Supreme Court, and on July 19th, 1972, the Supreme Court they voted 5-3 in favor of Major League Baseball, citing a precedent from a 1922 ruling in Federal Baseball Club versus the National League, which basically invoked the principle of stare decisis, which means to stand by things decided. Justice Lewis Powell recused himself owing to his ownership of stock in Anheuser-Busch, which owned the Cardinals. Now, like I said, this was a long, drawn-out process. This wasn't just Curt Flood. While all this was going on, Marvin Miller, who, like I said, head of the Players Association at the time, he staged a lightning strike at the beginning of the 1972 season, which lasted for 13 days. And at the end of that, the owners had to cough up $500,000 in an increase of the pension fund payments for players and the addition of salary arbitration to the collective bargaining agreement. Miller was really the champion of players' rights and free agency. He continued to support the removal of the reserve clause and had a large hand in Catfish Hunter becoming the first free agent in baseball history in 1974 after he took it to arbitration after the Oakland A's owner Charlie Finley failed to make an annuity payment, which breached the contract, and the arbitrator ruled in favor of Hunter, making him a free agent. And this all culminated in 1975 when he encouraged players Andy Messersmith of the Los Angeles Dodgers and Dave McNulty of the Baltimore Orioles to play out the 1975 season and not sign a contract for the 1976 season. Messersmith was a former Cy Young Award winner, and his contract ran out in 1975, and the Dodgers just renewed it for him. Messersmith took his case to arbitration as he felt he should have been declared a free agent. McNally had retired in the middle of the 1975 season, but the Players Association got McNally to join with Messersmith to increase his case. This led to the landmark decision by the arbitrator Peter Seiss, and on December 23rd, 1975, he interpreted the reserve clause to mean that the team was entitled to one single contract renewal, not perpetual renewals. So Messersmith and McNally were, as a result, ruled able to sign with any team. And like I said, this past week, February 3rd, was the 40th anniversary of the appellate district court judge John W. Oliver's decision to uphold that ruling, which also led to, the Eighth Court Circuit of Appeals later in the year upheld both rulings. And as a result, Major League Baseball and the union agreed to a new deal allowing teams to hold rights on their players for 6 years before they become free agents, which is basically the same system we have today. Dave, and thank you for joining us. Just the few questions I have for the younger viewers, because you actually lived through all this, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you tell me, in 1969, when the Curt Flood thing happened, because from everything I can tell, that was really the first attempt by the Players Union to get free agency and break free of the reserve clause. So when the Curt Flood case first happened, he refuses to report to Philadelphia after the trade. What was the general feeling? I mean, did people support him? Did they support the reserve clause?
Back then, when it first started in '69, I don't think many people understood what the whole concept was about. I think to them it was just watching baseball for the love of baseball, and that was it. I don't think the monetary factor at that point came into play at all. People watched baseball because they saw their favorite players playing, and they didn't care how much money the guy made. The only thing back then was free agency kind of, in my eyes, destroyed the loyalty. In other words, when you had teams in the 50s and 60s, you had players that were brought up by a team via trade, farm system, rookies, or whatever. And once they were brought up, they spent their whole career with one team. I mean, you can go through the Yankees, any of them. And all of a sudden, somebody turns around and says, wow, we can now make $2-3 million a year, and we'll go to whatever team has the biggest wallet. And to me, there's no loyalty anymore. I mean, I remember years ago they were awarded this pitch. I can't remember who the pitcher is now. He had a terrible losing record, so they doubled the salary.
I agree with what you're saying. The one thing I'll say to that, because I agree with you saying, but I think the lack of loyalty has become twofold. I think, yes, the players will leave for whoever plays them the most, but I think it's also they see that ownership looks at them as disposable commodities. I mean, I know John is a Mets fan. I don't know who your team is, but I know if you look at with the Yankee dynasty, when guys like Derek Jeter and Jorge Posada got older, they were kind of unceremoniously dumped out. I mean, Posada, they didn't give him a contract for his last season, and he didn't really play again. Bernie Williams, he stayed active for about 5 or 6 years, even though anybody picked him up. But I know a lot of fans felt that neither one of these guys got the send-offs as players that they should have had. And going to Derek Jeter, I remember he kind of had some bitter feelings because they only gave him a 3-year, $54 million contract, I think it was, when he was trying to get $20 million a year. So I think that loyalty factor kind of goes two ways. I mean, as much as it is the players trying to get every last dollar, I think it's also they see themselves as disposable commodities in the eyes of their ownership.
Oh, I agree with that. But don't you also feel that Bernie Williams in his last number of years, and even Jeter, I mean, they walked away thanks to free agency. Williams probably walked away with $40-50 million more than he would have, if not for free agency. Mariano Rivera, the same thing. You know, I mean, I think it's become it's business. I mean, baseball used to be a sport, and I think now the idea is baseball is much more of a business than a sport, and I think that's what's killing it.
I agree with all that, but in many ways it's like the battle with college football and should collegiate athletes be paid. I mean, you see these teams and organizations, as much as the player salaries have gone up, and a lot of that has been detrimental to the game, you also see the revenues going up every year. And these teams are worth billions and billions of dollars now. So as much as the players' salaries have gone up, the players are the ones who put the people in the stand and let the revenues go up for the ownership. So I get the point you're making that they walked away with a lot of money, but they also brought a lot to the ownership. And, staying with the Yankees, Bernie Williams, Jorge Posada, Derek Jeter, all those guys, they brought the first championships back to Yankee Stadium in over 15 years. It's not like, Yankee Stadium was probably still selling out ball games, no problem, but they brought a level of excitement back to Yankee Stadium that had dissipated thanks to the down years of the early 90s. So I think in their eyes, they felt that they were worth a certain amount because they had brought that prestige back, and I know a lot of fans agreed with this, they deserved a little bit of a better send-off than what they got from Brian Cashman and Yankee ownership. And I know in Jeter's eyes, when he didn't get what he thought he got and he knew he was only getting that 3-year contract, that was basically when he decided how long he was playing and that he was going to retire at the end of that contract. I mean, a lot of people would say, where's the loyalty to the team? A lot of times you see teams like the Miami Marlins or the Tampa Bay Rays. Tampa Bay Rays are in a small market. They can't afford the player's salaries like that. So what they do is they wind up trading the player away when he has 2 years left. I mean, we saw it, I think it was last week, they traded away the left-hander Jake McGee. Middle of the 2014 season, they traded away David Price. They're one of the top teams who wind up trading away a star player before that player comes to free agency. And I think that's one of the reasons, as great as Tampa Bay has been with player development, I think that's one of the reasons why they can't really get a solid fan base in that Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, but I think it was Florida I think it was 96 when the Florida Marlins won, I believe.
Yeah.
And in between the seasons, was Laurie the owner of that team too?
Laurie was not the owner of the 96 team. He was the owner of the 2003 team that did the same thing you're about to say.
Yeah. And basically sold off everybody. Dismantled the whole team, sold off everybody. And just, if you can't, his market is terrible. If you ever watch Marlin games even now, it doesn't matter who they play. They could be in the World Series and the stands would be half empty. It's just a terrible market, for some reason.
The one thing I will say, and I remember this, the reason why Jeffrey Lurie was not the owner of the 96 Marlin is because he was the owner of the Montreal Expos, who I'm sure I don't have to remind you how they did basically the same thing. They stripped their entire team. They had the 94 team. If the season didn't get ended by the strike, it probably would have been the New York Yankees and the Montreal Expos in the World Series. And then starting the next year, he sold off players like Ken Hill, Marquise Grissom, Larry Walker, Randy Johnson was on there at one time. So they were kind of the originators of what the Marlins did, and then Laurie brought that cheapness to the Marlins when he took over them after the Expos moved to Washington.
So you know what the other issue is with free agency? Fans complain about it. I'm sure, I hear it all the time. The fans will complain, this guy doesn't deserve this money and this guy doesn't deserve this money. But you know something? The Yankees still will draw 3-4 million people a year, paying $50 for parking, $8 for a hot dog, $4, $5 for a hot dog. People are still spending money like crazy, so why not? If the fans don't like it, let the fans stay away and the owners will feel it. But it never works out that way.
I absolutely agree with you, and you're right. The same people who complain about it are the ones who are at the ballparks every day. That would be the way to show the owners that, hey, something has to stop here. But you're right. That hasn't changed yet, and until it does, it's just going to be the same thing because the owners know they can get away with it. And the fact is, that's not a Yankee thing. That's not everyone thinks of that as a New York thing.
That's a sports thing.
That's sports. That's baseball. That's every sport.
Yep. There's fan loyalty. It doesn't matter. You see. There are times when in every sport the team is playing lousy, and I remember the Jets and Giants. They'll still draw 75,000 people. The team's terrible, And
everybody complains about the Everybody complains about the PSLs and everything, but they will still go to the games.
They'll still go to the games, and they'll still draw thousands of people, and the same people will still complain.
Yep. To kind of bring this back to what we were talking about in terms of the history and everything. So Catfish Hunter becomes the first free agent in 1974.
I think he signed, $2 million or something?
That sounds about right. I can't remember the exact contract.
It was little compared to now, that's for sure.
What'd you say?
It was very small compared to now, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He signed with the Yankees, I believe, after the thing with the A's.
Yeah.
So now you had said people didn't really know what it was. By the time 1974 came around and you saw Catfish Hunter, what was the initial reaction? Because, I mean, player salaries were very low. You know, guys like Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays never really made that much. You know, this was still the time where players had to take second jobs to afford themselves. Now you see someone like Catfish Hunter getting all this money. What was the reaction to that?
When DiMaggio made $100,000 a year, you thought he was like he hit the lotto, you know.
Yeah.
And that was the most anybody ever got. I mean, the average guy made $20,000, $30,000 a year, if that much. You're right. They had to take second jobs. They had no choice about it. They had a family to support. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's insane to think about that as a time when there was a time when players had to take second jobs out. But there was. So, like I said, Hunter signs. He gets the multi-million-dollar contract. What was the reaction to that?
You know, again, I don't think it was a major reaction because I think people were still so enthralled with baseball as a sport. If one guy, you know, our eventual Hall of Famer, makes $2 million, so what? You know, I think the answer was good for him. But then it started getting very prevalent to the point where if you had a bad year, they would raise your salary. And I think it was getting to the point, it was a joke. It was like, you know, even now, it was like, how high, when's the first $30 million guy going to show up? I think it's going to be the next 2 or 3 years.
It did happen already. David Price is not. Yeah, David Price is going to be getting $30 or $31 million a season with his new contract with the Red Sox.
You know, I hate to say it, but it's still a kid's game that we used to play in the backyard or at the schoolyard. And it's taking a stick and hitting a ball. Yeah, it's hard to do, and it's the hardest sport because it's round bat against a round ball, but worth $30 million. And you're also talking about a pitcher, a guy that's going to play every 5 days. I mean, figure out how much he's making. If he's making $31 million a year, and do a little simple math, he's making an incredible amount of money per start.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I was stunned that Boston gave him that money because as much as Boston has become, you know, a high-spending team over the last 15 years, you know, you look at the way they won their 2012 championship, and that wasn't a team that was built on big salaries. That was a team that had brought in 5 or 6 mid-market free agents. They signed them for about 2 or 3 years each. They didn't really do the long contracts, and then they're giving this money to David Price. I mean, I knew their rotation was in shambles and that they were going to go after a big name, but for me, $30 million was an insane amount of money, and the guy's going to be 31 this year, and they gave him an opt-out after 3 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, you got a guy like Mike Trout who's making, what, $21, $22 million a year, something like that, I believe?
I don't think he's up to that yet. I think that's coming. Actually, no. I'm going to stand corrected here. I think he signed a 5-year, $125 million contract. But you got to remember, he's not even 24 yet.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So he's got all right. So put it this way: he's making $23 million a year, right?
Yeah.
At the age of 24, he signed a 5-year contract. So at 29, assuming he has the career he's going to have, which I would say there's no stopping him at the rate he's going.
Absolutely.
And 5 years from now, when he gets free agent status again, why should he hit up for $40 million a year? How about $200 million for 5 years? It wouldn't shock me one bit.
Well, the one thing they're saying is Bryce Harper is still a couple years away from free agency. I think he's going to be 26 in 2018 when he hits free agency. And there is speculation that he could be a $50 million a year player.
You know, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous to me. That's
no,
ridiculous.
I agree with you on that wholeheartedly.
I like what the Mets are doing the last couple of years, as opposed to the Yankees. I think the Yankees last off season spent $500 million. Am I correct with that, or is that too high?
That was the year before, and I think you're dead on that. Yeah.
All right, so they spent $500 million, and where'd they end up? They didn't make the playoffs.
No, you're right.
So what is that? At least the Mets. Yeah, the Mets got caught in the whole Madoff scandal, and they didn't have the money because Wilpon lost a ton of money. But you know something? So they build it up from scratch. They get Harvey. They get Wheeler. So what?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with that? You bring them, you know, that goes back to the old, you know, in the 50s and 60s when you had farm systems, and you bring the guys up in your system, and you bring them to the majors. They'd start off making very little money, and they grow with the team. As opposed to let's trade for, you know, I remember Reggie Jackson. You still back in when free agency every year was like Reggie Jackson making how much money, you know?
Yeah. No, listen, I've been a proponent of team building from the ground up since the Mets started doing it when Alderson came in 2011. I thought it was a great way to do it. I've never really been one of these fans that says, oh, because they're not spending money, they're not going anywhere. I've liked the idea of trying to build a team from the ground up and having a pipeline of talent with your farm system for sustained success. Because if you look at how the Braves did it in the 1990s, you know, they signed Maddox as a free agent, but they brought up Glavine. They traded for Smoltz when he was a prospect. They drafted Steve Avery, who had a few good years. And then you looked at that offense they put together. They had a good offense, and a lot of that was homegrown talent.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a lot of these teams go back to the old-time idea. Let's bring the players up and let them grow with the team, as opposed to let's, you know, like the Yankees do. I mean, if you go by the Yankees' attitude, logically it should work. The team that spends the most money should win every year. It doesn't work that way.
See, no, the one thing I will say is the one thing the Yankees have proven, just like the Dodgers have proven, it's not about how much money you spend. I said this on the show a couple of weeks ago. It's not about how much money you spend. It's about making the right moves. It's the same as it's always been, basically. Because you look at the Yankees, you talked about the 2013 offseason when they spent all that money to get Masahiro Tanaka and Jacoby Ellsbury and Beltran and all those guys. They basically spent $500 million to maintain their own status quo.
Yep.
Because that's the dangers of making all these high-priced free agent moves, is that you have to continue to spend just to keep your team somewhat relevant. And
it's not even that. They have to keep spending because if they don't, they'll lose their fan base. And fan base goes down, concession money goes down, and revenues hit the toilet.
For any other team, I would agree with you, but I don't know if you can really say that about the Yankee fan base, just because there are, you know, the Yankees have one of the largest fan bases in the country, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you have a lot of people who grew up in the 90s and don't really know about the 1980s, how they went 15 years without making the playoffs out. You know, they don't know. Yeah, they don't know the dredges of the 1990s. They don't know the Stump Merrill days.
Yep.
You know? Yeah. So I just think a lot of them just kind of, they'll go to the ballpark because they expect to see the Yankees win.
I remember, it was too far in front of me, but I remember when Mantle came up 1 year and went back down. And then he came back up again.
I remember hearing about that. That was when, they tried to play him in center field next to DiMaggio, and it didn't work out?
That's when Mantle came up. He came up as he was number 6.
Wasn't he 6?
Went down. Yeah, he was number 6. Came up, played a little bit. They sent him down. Came up and became number 7. You know, everybody forgets that Mantle, when he started, was not a superstar. They sent him back down. Obviously, whatever happened down there worked. You know.
Have you seen? I'm sure you have. You've seen the movie 61. Billy Crystal was the director, right?
Oh yeah, the HBO movie. Sure.
Yeah, I love that. I love that movie. Like, I'm a Mets fan, and I love that movie. I thought it was a great movie.
Great movie.
One thing Yeah, the one thing I remember him saying was he had so much pressure and all these expectations, and they gave him the number 6, and he hated that number because DiMaggio was 5. Who was 4? Was that Yogi?
4 was Gehrig.
4 was Gehrig. 4 was Gehrig. 5 was DiMaggio. He was supposed to be 6, and he hated the pressures on that. Yeah. And he kind of felt like he fell to the pressure after that. And when he came back up with 7, he was able to kind of do his own thing.
Well, you got to remember, back then, when the numbers were in their infancy, the players' numbers were given based on position. So Gehrig was 4.
Oh, okay.
Ruth was 3. DiMaggio was 5. You know, and obviously, if you make Mantle 6, Mantle didn't know what he was getting into, how good he was going to be. You know, so he said, let's take 7 because it gives me an opportunity to spread out a little bit, so the pressure isn't on me. You know, and then he stepped to the drain pipe, and that killed everything pretty much. You know, that destroyed his knee, and that was the end of it all. Imagine, I always look around as how good he would have been if he would not have killed his knee.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. The sky was truly the limit for him on that.
Oh, yeah. And, well, they're saying Mike Trout is the new Mickey Mantle, you know. That's the claim.
Well, I think it's so hard to compare players, especially those who got 40 years in between them, because it's a totally different generation. And I'll tell you right now, Trout doesn't seem to be the party guy and have the nightlife the way that Mantle did. So I just think
Mantle was a party guy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I just think it's very hard to compare those.
Forget it. Mantle, Martin, and Ford, forget it.
Yeah.
Party out.
Absolutely.
But you got Mantle also played for almost. He started at 51, I think, and he played about 69. So he played for roughly about 18 years. How long has Trout been playing for?
Hey, he hasn't been playing very long either. But you got to remember, towards the end, then the knees caught up to him those last few years. I know everyone thought he hung around 1 year too long.
Oh, yeah, the last year was 1 year too long. It was.
Yeah.
But, you know, something, but you know.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, but as far as the free agency thing, I mean, I don't know. It's you made the comment, it's a two-edged sword, it really is. If the people didn't like the salaries, then you don't go to the stadium. But the fans are so loyal that they don't think like that. I don't think, after a while, I really think that the whole idea of a player making $20, $30, $40 million a year, I think most fans turn around and say, so what, who really cares?
Yeah. But let me ask you something. I mean, you said that it's because the players trying to get, you know, the highest money they can. Don't you think at some point the owners have to turn around and say, all right, we're not going any higher than this?
See, I don't know, because the issue with that is, again, you have the Yankees, Dodgers, whatever, getting 3-4 million people with concessions and parking and all the revenues they get. As long as the owners are not losing money, they'll pay whatever they want to pay. Because you made the comment before, these players do bring the people in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But don't you think that until some owner says, kind of like what Alderson did with Cespedes and said, we're not going above 3 years for you on this. Don't you think until some owner winds up doing that, you're just going to keep with the rising salaries and everything? And sooner or later, don't you think until some owner says that it's going to start hurting the product at some point?
Yeah, but you know what the issue is, though? Most of these teams, if not all of them, have been owned by the same family for years. I mean, there are very few turnovers in baseball. You get teams that, you know, the team will be owned by the same guy for 20, 30, 40 years. Who knows how long? You know, it could even be longer. I mean, the New York Football Giants have been owned by the Mara family since 1925. You know, just as an example. Steinbrenner originally bought the Yankees in 1973.
And how much did he buy? Do you remember how much he bought him for?
He bought him from CBS. He paid $10 million.
That's insane.
Now it's worth $10 million. Yep. Now it's worth $2 billion. 2 to 3. I think maybe even more.
It's absolutely insane.
Not a bit turnover. The guy had a good vision. Got to give him credit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But look at the New York Football Giants. Wellington Mara bought the team in 1925. He won in a poker game, and it cost him $2,500. And now 90 years later, the team's got to be worth $1.5 billion, if not more, I'm sure.
At least.
So these owners, you get very few. You know, if you notice, if you look at the history of, you'd have to go through all the sports and the histories. I bet there's very little family turnover as far as ownership. Because why would you? I mean, if you ask any of these wealthy owners, I've read a lot of issues in Forbes magazines and Sports Illustrated, different things, and they'll turn around and say an owner of a team who is more than likely a multi-millionaire, if not billionaire, to begin with, does not buy a team knowing he's going to make any money. They usually buy a team knowing they're going to lose money because it's a great write-off, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get guys. I mean, most of these guys who own teams, except for Steinbrenner, who was wealthy to begin with, but then became fabulously wealthy. A lot of these guys made all their money prior to owning a team, and they just do it because they feel like it. Like the guy that owns the Atlanta Falcons, Arthur Blank.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the founders of Home Depot. So he
and
didn't really
the guy. The one thing I was going to say, the guy who owns the Tigers is the guy who owns Papa John's. There's a bunch of guys like that out there.
Yeah. Well, look at the guy that owns, Dolan, the guy that owns the Knicks in the Garden with Cablevision.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't really need the team to make them wealthy. Yeah, it'll make them wealthier, but if they didn't have the team, they're not exactly going on welfare tomorrow. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of them do it. I think a lot of them do it for simply the love of the sport, and they had the wherewithal to take a shot. And, yeah, they're making money. Yeah, I don't think there are too many owners that are losing money. No, I mean,
from what I know, you've seen that more in basketball. I know that's changed recently, but I remember at the time of the lockout, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, there were basketball owners saying that 20% of the league was losing money.
It's possible, yeah, but the question is 20% of the league is losing money, but is the owner going to sell his multi-million-dollar mansion and move to an apartment tomorrow? I doubt his.
No,
I would doubt the owner's lifestyle will change one bit at all.
Yeah.
I
agree with John. I agree with you on that one. So I get the feeling we could go on about this subject the whole night. I think we should bring John back in now. John, you still there, or did you hang up?
Yeah. No, I'm still here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, David. I really appreciate it. Kind of jumped around, but it was good. Yeah, absolutely. It was good talking to you about the whole thing.
You too. Take care.